Welcome to Reformed Thinking. So, when your life is just totally falling apart, what do you do at 3 in the morning?
Yeah, that is the big question, isn't it?
Right. I mean, picture the scenario. The crisis has hit. Maybe everything went wrong at work, or a really critical relationship just shattered.
Or your reputation is under attack.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah.
And the house is completely silent, the lights are off, and you were just lying there staring straight up at the ceiling.
And your heart is just racing.
Exactly. I mean, your mind is running through 1,000 different disastrous scenarios, right? You're cataloging every single mistake you made, every threat looming on the horizon.
It's awful. Sleep is completely out of the question.
It is. Your nervous system is just on fire.
And, the physical toll of that kind of anxiety is intense. The elevated cortisol, the shallow breathing. People describe it as feeling like hunted by their own thoughts.
Hunted by your own thoughts. Man, that is a heavy way to put it, but it's so true. Well, today we are taking a deep dive into an ancient text, Psalm 4. And we are relying heavily on John Peter Lange's massive, highly detailed work, a commentary on the Holy Scriptures.
A really incredible resource.
It really is. We're looking at a man who was experiencing the ultimate midnight crisis. I mean, he was betrayed by his own family. He was hunted by an actual army. His reputation was totally destroyed.
And yet, amidst all of that, he closes his eyes and sleeps like a baby.
Which is wild. So to grasp how staggering that is, we really have to set the historical stage here.
Right. So we were talking about King David, but not David the Conqueror, not the guy with the slingshot or the giant slayer.
Yeah, this is David the Fugitive.
Right. He is fleeing from his own son, Absalom. And this is not a foreign invasion from, the Philistines or the Ammonites, where the lines of allegiance are super clear.
Yeah, you know who the bad guys are in those situations.
Exactly. But this is an internal, devastating rebellion that just tore his family and his entire nation in half.
And it wasn't a sudden thing, right? Absalom had been running this long-term, calculated psychological operation.
Oh, absolutely. 4 years of slow subversion. Absalom would literally stand by the gates of Jerusalem, intercepting people who brought legal disputes to the king.
Wow.
Yeah, he would hold their hands, kiss their cheeks, and tell them, your claims are good and right, but there is no man deputed by the king to hear you.
Classic politician move.
Total gaslighting. He'd say, if only I were judge in the land, I would give you justice. And he just stole the hearts of the men of Israel right out from under his father.
Just undermining him every single day.
Right. He gathered the prominent leaders, the military minds, and orchestrated this massive coup.
And so the betrayal comes from the very people David trusted most. I mean, his own counselor, Ahithophel, defects to Absalom's side.
That had to hurt so much.
Yeah. And the shock of it forces David to abandon his capital city, Jerusalem, immediately. He leaves with just a small band of loyalists, weeping as he walks barefoot up the Mount of Olives.
His head covered in mourning.
Yeah. He is essentially a refugee in his own kingdom. He doesn't even know if he will survive the week.
So the commentary points out a brilliant structural detail about the literature that emerges from this flight. Psalm 3 and Psalm 4 are structurally paired.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, the ancient consensus is that Psalm 3 is David's morning prayer during this desperate escape, while Psalm 4 functions as his evening prayer.
Okay, that makes sense.
And the musical directions provided in the ancient title are incredibly telling. It is assigned to the chief musician on Neginoth.
Neginoth. Okay, so that indicates stringed instruments, right?
Yes, exactly. The scholars make a really sharp distinction regarding that choice. This text was not meant to be accompanied by wind instruments.
No horns.
Right. No horns, no trumpets or shofars. The instruments that would typically signal war or an alarm or the gathering of troops.
Yeah, the loud, blaring stuff.
Right. It is accompanied exclusively by strings. Think of, the harp or the lyre. The acoustics are literally designed to create a soothing, methodical rhythm.
I love that.
Yeah, the poetic structure of the text itself, particularly those final stanzas, it's engineered to bring a chaotic, terrifying day to a peaceful close.
Man, I just love the psychological contrast happening there. I mean, the entire world around David is blaring alarms.
Literal alarms.
Yeah. There are literal trumpets blowing in Jerusalem declaring Absalom king. There are troops mobilizing to hunt him down. But David's internal soundtrack is this soothing string melody.
He refuses to let the external panic dictate his internal rhythm.
And that brings us right to the opening cry of the text, the very first verse, where David establishes his theological footing. He cries out, "Hear me when I call, O God of my righteousness."
And that phrasing, God of my righteousness, it carries immense weight.
Yeah, unpack that for us.
So Franz Delitzsch, one of the prominent scholars cited in Lange's commentary, offers a really brilliant analysis of this. He explains that Jehovah is the possessor of righteousness, the author of righteousness, and the supreme judge of righteousness. So when David is misunderstood, when he is slandered and actively persecuted by his own people, he does not look to himself to prove his innocence.
Right, he doesn't hold a press conference.
No, not at all.
He does not send out messengers with a scroll detailing his track record, trying to convince the public that he was actually a good king and Absalom is lying.
Which is what we would all do, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Eh.
The natural human reflex when you are attacked is to get incredibly defensive. You want to list all your good deeds, all your qualifications, and prove to your critics that you are justified.
Yeah, you want to clear your name.
But David bypasses that entire process. He appeals to a higher court.
Delitzsch notes that God justifies righteousness when it is persecuted on earth. David recognizes that his right standing is not generated from within himself, nor is it validated by public opinion polls.
It's anchored entirely in the character of God.
Right. God is the one who secures his position. He hands his reputation over to the Creator, which immediately shuts down that frantic defensive reflex you just mentioned.
Because, if the supreme judge of the universe holds your righteousness, the opinions of the rebels back in Jerusalem just do not matter.
They fade into the background.
Yeah. And right after that appeal, David uses a phrase that introduces an incredibly physical sensation. He says, "Thou hast enlarged me when I was in distress."
The Hebrew concept there translates literally to expansion.
Expansion, okay.
Yeah, it means creating space for the anxious heart, or creating space out of a straitened, restricted, tight situation.
So let's talk about the physical sensation of a panic attack for a second.
Sure.
When that distress hits, your chest tightens up. The walls feel like they're literally closing in. Your peripheral vision narrows.
It's terrifying.
It is like being trapped in a suffocating, overcrowded boardroom. The air conditioning has failed, people are arguing aggressively, the tension is just unbearable, and you can barely draw a single full breath. The restriction is physical.
That is a very visceral description of extreme psychological pressure.
Right. But then suddenly the double doors of that boardroom open, and you step out onto a wide open balcony.
Ah, the relief.
Yes. The cool, crisp night air hits your face. Your lungs immediately expand. The immediate crisis of oxygen deprivation is just over.
Right.
That physical expansion of the chest, that sudden, glorious rush of fresh air, that is what this phrase captures. Thou hast enlarged me. It is the gift of breathing room.
And we can actually trace that back to David's literal geographic reality at this very moment.
Oh, really? Tell me about that.
Yeah, the commentary notes this likely refers to a very recent physical deliverance. So during his flight from Jerusalem, David was in a cramped, dangerous, and claustrophobic position in the Judean hills.
So he was physically trapped.
Almost. Absalom's forces could have easily flanked him, trapped him in a ravine, and ended the war in a single afternoon. But David managed to cross the Jordan River.
Okay.
He reached the wider, safer region of Mahanaim, which is located in the Transjordanian Plateau.
So he physically moved from a claustrophobic trap to a wide open space.
Exactly. He went from a tight, perilous geographical bottleneck into a broad territory where he could actually breathe freely, gather his loyal men, restock supplies, and prepare a defense.
Wow.
The spiritual reality perfectly mirrors the physical reality here. God gave him geographical breathing room, and in doing so, granted him psychological and spiritual breathing room.
That is amazing. And it makes you think about where you turn to find breathing room when your own circumstances feel suffocating.
Right.
Like when the bills pile up or the workplace turns toxic, do you try to claw your way out using your own strength, just grasping for control?
Yeah.
Or do you look to the God who can suddenly enlarge your space, alter the terrain, and give your lungs the capacity to draw breath again?
It completely shifts the focus from the restriction of the problem to the expansiveness of God's provision.
It totally does. It changes the entire paradigm of how a person processes a threat.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, having established this cry for breathing room, David makes a sharp pivot. He turns his attention away from his prayer to God, and he directly addresses his antagonists.
Right, he speaks to them directly.
He calls out to the sons of men. Now, when I hear sons of men in this context, I am picturing the aristocracy, the people who bankrolled Absalom's coup.
Well, the linguistic breakdown in the commentary confirms your suspicion. The phrase sons of men often contrasts with God to highlight general human weakness, but the specific Hebrew words used here indicate prominent men.
So not just the average citizen.
Right. We are not talking about the common foot soldiers or the peasant class who just got swept up in the excitement. As the great reformer Martin Luther called them, these are the great fellows.
The great fellows. I like that.
Yeah, this refers to the political elite, the wealthy landowners, the influential leaders who threw their weight and their capital behind Absalom.
The power brokers.
Yes. David asks these power brokers how long they will turn his glory into shame, how long they will love vanity and seek after leasing.
And leasing is an archaic English word for lying and falsehoods, right?
Correct. The commentary explains that vanity here refers to the absolute emptiness of their designs. They are building a new government on hollow arguments to justify their treason.
Because Absalom's entire platform was basically a fabricated public relations campaign.
Exactly. He stood at the gates and told the people that David did not care about their problems, that the current administration was corrupt, and that under King Absalom, there would be perfect justice for everyone.
It was an empire built on deceit.
Just a total mirage.
Yeah. David is calling out the elites for buying into that mirage. But then he says something that honestly stops me in my tracks. He tells these rebels, "Know that the Lord hath set apart him that is godly for himself."
Ah, yes.
Wait, looking at David's track record, the horrific incident with Bathsheba, the calculated murder of Uriah the Hittite, how can he possibly call himself the godly man here?
It's a fair question.
Right. That feels incredibly hypocritical. Is he claiming flawless moral character?
That is the trap many readers fall into. They assume godly means subjectively perfect. But the commentary strongly refutes that interpretation.
Okay, lay it on me. What does it actually mean?
So, the Hebrew word translated as godly is hasid. Herman Hupfeld, one of the scholars cited, provides a thorough analysis of this term. It is a denominative of the word haste, which refers specifically to the covenant grace and mercy of God.
Oh, okay, so the root of the word points to God's action, not man's behavior.
Precisely. In its passive form, which is used here, hasid means someone who is favored, someone who stands in a condition of grace, someone brought into a covenant of grace by Jehovah.
That changes everything.
It really does. It does not mean David earned his throne through his own flawless morality. It indicates an extraordinary distinction in the divine government. God selects someone for his specific use and glory based entirely on his own sovereign choice.
So the assurance of answered prayer, the confidence David has, comes from God's election, not human merit.
Spot on.
That is a massive theological distinction. He is not saying, I am a perfect person, therefore God will save me from Absalom. He is saying, God has sovereignly chosen to set his unmerited favor upon me, and therefore my standing is secure.
The commentary quotes the Puritan writer Thomas Watson to illustrate this beautifully. Watson says, "We set apart things that are precious. The godly are set apart as God's peculiar treasure."
God's peculiar treasure.
He compares them to fine gold, double refined, a royal diadem. The value is not inherent in the individual's flawless performance. The value comes from the fact that the sovereign king has selected them for his treasury.
Wow.
Yeah. God has not brought David into this high position because of men or because David manipulated the polls, but because of his own wonderful guidance.
And think about how liberating that is for you. I mean, if you're standing in the world, your ultimate security relies on your flawless performance, you will live your entire life in terror.
You'd never rest.
No. You will be terrified of making a mistake, terrified of human opposition, terrified of being canceled, replaced, or exposed. But if your standing relies on God's unmerited sovereign selection, the pressure is entirely off.
The burden is lifted.
Yeah. You can face the opposition of prominent, influential people, the great fellows, without an ounce of fear because they are not the ones who determine your worth or your destiny.
It entirely removes the crushing anxiety of having to justify your own existence. If the creator of the universe has set you apart for himself, the opinions of the sons of men become irrelevant background noise.
Totally irrelevant. And if you know God secures your position, it completely changes how you respond to the people slandering you. You don't need to lash out during the day. You can actually process that anger differently.
Which leads right into the next verse.
Right. The text says, "Stand in awe and sin not. Commune with your own heart upon your bed and be still." Now, my initial assumption is that David is still telling the rebels to calm down.
And a lot of people read it that way, but the commentary presents a highly compelling historical perspective from Christopher Wordsworth suggesting otherwise.
No.
What does he say? Wordsworth argues that this warning is likely directed at David's own zealous, fiercely loyal partisans.
His inner circle, the
Yeah.
men who fled Jerusalem with him.
Yes. Think about men like his nephew, Abishai.
Oh, Abishai was intense.
Very intense. The historical record tells us that during this chaotic flight, a man named Shimei from the house of Saul came out and started cursing David.
Yeah, I remember this story.
Shimei is throwing literal stones at the king, kicking up dust and yelling, come out, thou bloody man!"
Just totally humiliating the king.
And Abishai, who is a hardened military commander, is furious. He turns to David and says, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and take off his head."
Wow. I mean, Abishai is experiencing intense righteous indignation. He is angry, and he has a valid, logical reason to be angry.
His anointed king is being unjustly abused by a traitor.
But David restrains him.
Right. David refuses to let Abishai retaliate. Wordsworth suggests this verse, "Stand in awe and sin not," is David's counsel to his own loyal followers.
That makes so much sense.
They have righteous anger, but they must not let it boil over into sin. They must not act rashly or violently in the heat of the moment. The Hebrew word for stand in awe can translate to trembling with anger or agitation.
So David is saying, you're agitated, you're furious, your blood is boiling, but do not let that drive you into sinful retaliation.
Exactly.
And the bed acts as a midnight counselor. Commune with your own heart upon your bed and be still. The silence of the night is the absolute best environment to stop rash daytime reactions.
It really is.
During the day, everything is incredibly loud. The adrenaline is pumping, the critics are yelling, the stones are flying, and your friends are aggressively urging you to fight back. But when you lie down in the dark, the external noise stops. It forces you into a state of ethical, rational consideration.
And the ancient Hebrew understanding of the heart is vital here.
Okay, tell me more about that.
In their thought, the heart is not just the seat of fleeting emotions. It is the center of cognition. It is the sphere of ethical deliberation.
So it's where you think, not just where you feel.
Right. It is where you weigh your motives and form the determinations of your will. The quiet of the evening is perfectly suited for this intense self-examination. You take that boiling, trembling anger, you lay it on your pillow, and you let the silence cool it down.
Man, how many disastrous decisions could be avoided if we took our anger to bed instead of to the internet?
Oh, so many.
Right. You draft that furious email, you formulate that biting response to a critic, and instead of hitting send while your adrenaline is spiking, you commune with your heart upon your bed. You let the silence of the night interrogate your motives. You ask yourself, am I defending God's honor, or am I just defending my own bruised ego?
And David takes it a step further. He tells his men to offer the sacrifices of righteousness and put your trust in the Lord.
Which creates a striking immediate contrast with the rebels.
Yes, it does, because Absalom and his followers are currently occupying Jerusalem. That means they have physical control of the bronze altar.
Right, they have the actual temple apparatus.
They have the priests who defected. They have access to all the religious rituals, the incense, the sacrifices.
So they're going through all the proper liturgical motions. They look incredibly pious on the outside.
But the commentary points out that while the rebels have the rituals, they lack the required internal disposition.
Because true religious practice requires a heart aligned with God's will.
Exactly. Empty rituals mean absolutely nothing if the worshiper's heart is in a state of active treason against God's anointed king.
So David is essentially telling his followers, we might be out here in the dirt of the wilderness, completely severed from the physical altar, but we can offer the true sacrifices of righteousness by bringing a humble, trusting heart to Jehovah.
It is the classic conflict between form and substance.
Yeah, you can have the beautiful building, the flawless choir, the perfectly executed ceremonies, but if your heart is full of deceit, ambition, and malice, it is just noise. Meanwhile, you can be sitting on a rock in the wilderness, offering a genuine, broken prayer of trust, and that is a true, acceptable sacrifice.
It strips away all the external trappings of religion and focuses intensely on the state of the individual's trust.
But let us be brutally honest about human nature here.
Okay.
Even with all this midnight reflection, even with a solid theological grasp of divine election and true sacrifices, prolonged stress eventually wears people down.
It does. It takes a toll.
The adrenaline wears off, the reality of the cold, hard wilderness sets in, and morale inevitably starts to plummet. And that leads to a doubting question that starts circulating among David's ranks. The text says there be many that say, who will show us any good?
The commentary describes this as a question born of pure, crushing despondency.
So these are his own guys asking this.
Yeah, these are not the enemies mocking them from the walls of Jerusalem. These are David's own followers, the people who sacrificed everything to stay loyal to him. But the situation looks incredibly bleak.
They are looking at the horizon, and they see no path to victory, no hope of restoration, no supply lines.
They are exhausted, hungry, and terrified of the massive army Absalom is gathering.
It is the voice of absolute burnout. I mean, when you have been fighting an uphill battle for so long, and you look around and think, is anything good ever going to happen again? Are we just going to die out here? It is a deeply relatable human moment.
It is a stark reality, but David counters this despondency not with a shallow motivational speech, not with false promises of an immediate military victory, but with a prayer.
What does he pray?
He says, "Lord, lift thou up the light of thy countenance upon us."
And that language is heavily loaded with ancient context, isn't it?
Oh, yes. The scholars point out that this directly merges the ancient priestly blessing of number 6, "The Lord make his face shine upon thee," with a very visual military concept.
A military concept.
Yeah, the specific Hebrew word used here carries an allusion to a waving banner or standard.
Like a banner being raised on a battlefield.
Exactly. When the troops are scattered, demoralized, and confused in the fog of war, the commander raises the banner high on a hill so everyone can see it, orient themselves, and rally around it.
Oh, that is such a cool image.
Right. David is asking God to raise the light of his face like a luminous banner over his despairing followers. Instead of complaining alongside them, he opposes their unbelieving question with a prayer for divine illumination.
And then David makes a massive claim following that prayer. He says, "Thou hast put gladness in my heart more than in the time that their corn and their wine increased."
That is a bold statement.
Let's look at the physical reality, though. David's men are starving. They are sleeping in the dirt. The rebels are sitting in the capital city, eating from the royal storehouses. When David claims he has more gladness in his heart than the guys with all the food and wine, isn't that just a classic case of sour grapes? I mean, isn't he just using spiritual rationalization to make himself feel better about losing everything?
From a purely cynical perspective, it might sound like an empty cope, but the historical reality provided by Delitzsch proves otherwise.
Oh, tell me.
This event likely occurred around the time of the Feast of Tabernacles. The agricultural harvest was officially past.
Okay, so the crops were in.
Yes. Absalom and his rebel army had barns literally overflowing with grain and vats completely full of new wine. They possessed massive, tangible resources.
Yeah, David.
David and his loyalists look like a band of starving freebooters, relying on whatever sparse provisions they could scrape together from sympathizers in the hostile territory of Gilead.
So the contrast is literal. Full barns in Jerusalem versus empty stomachs in Mahane.
Yes. But Delitzsch argues that the gladness of heart David experiences is objectively superior.
Why is that?
Because the light of God's face provides a soul-level satisfaction that physical foods simply cannot touch.
Right.
The rebels have material abundance, but they do not have peace with God. Their consciences are stained with treason. David has extreme material poverty, but he possesses the ultimate treasure, the conscious, joyful awareness of God's favor.
The commentary includes a brilliant quote from Charles Spurgeon on this verse. Spurgeon says, "Thou art with me is a far more blessed cry than harvest home." That hits hard.
It really does.
Harvest home is the ancient shout of ultimate earthly success. The crops are safely in the barn. Winter is provided for. Today, harvest home is the full bank account, the vested stock options, the promotion, the perfect house. It is the cry of material security.
Right.
But Spurgeon argues that simply saying, "Thou art with me," brings a superior, more lasting joy.
Spurgeon goes on to say, "Let my granary be empty, I am yet full of blessing, if Jesus Christ smiles upon me. But if I have all the world, I am poor without him."
That is a radical redefinition of wealth. The rebels are wealthy in fleeting circumstances. David is wealthy in his eternal soul.
And the supreme gladness, this overwhelming confidence in the light of God's face, leads us directly into the physical outcome of this entire text.
Which is the most remarkable part of the song. David says, "I will both lay me down in peace and sleep." It is the immediacy of it that gets me.
Yeah, the Hebrew adverb used here indicates simultaneous action. At once will I lay me down and sleep.
Oh.
The moment his head hits the pillow, he is out. There's no tossing, no turning, no agonizing over tomorrow's battle plans, no checking the perimeter.
Spurgeon makes a great observation here. He points out that David is not lying awake, listening to every rustling leaf, wondering if an assassin from Absalom's camp is sneaking up on his tent with a dagger.
Which, given his circumstances, would be a completely rational fear. I mean, he is the highest value target in an active war zone. He has a bounty on his head.
Right. Think about a small toddler. If you take a toddler and put them in a strange, dark hotel room, they might be terrified. The shadows look scary. The sounds are weird.
Everything is unfamiliar.
But if a parent they trust explicitly comes in, sits in the chair in the corner, and says, "I am right here, I will watch over you," that child can close their eyes and fall asleep instantly.
That's a perfect analogy.
The unfamiliar environment hasn't changed. The darkness hasn't changed. The potential threats outside the dial haven't changed. The only thing that changed is the presence of the protector. David is that child. The environment is hostile, but the Father is in the room.
And that imagery ties perfectly into a fascinating debate among scholars over the translation of the final line. "For thou, Lord, only makest me dwell in safety."
Okay, what is the debate?
Well, does it mean God alone is his safety, or does it mean David dwells alone but in safety?
The distinction there seems massive.
Yeah.
I mean, if it means God alone is his safety, it focuses entirely on the exclusive source of protection. But what happens if we look at the second option?
Scholars like Edward Ream and Joseph Addison Alexander argue strongly for the second translation. David is dwelling alone in safety.
Okay.
This highlights his severe physical isolation. He is separated from the massive armies of Israel, separated from the fortified, thick stone walls of Jerusalem, separated from his usual palace guards.
So he is completely stripped of human defense.
Right. He is physically vulnerable, exposed to the elements, and completely isolated. He is dwelling alone. Yet, because of his intimate divine protection, he is completely, utterly safe.
I prefer that second reading so much more. It speaks directly to the reality of the human experience.
It does, doesn't it?
You can be entirely isolated. You can feel completely alone in your workplace, standing up for what is right while everyone else compromises. You can be the only one in your family holding on to faith. You are dwelling alone, but you are dwelling in perfect safety because the Almighty is standing guard over your life.
It creates a beautiful paradox. Utter, visible vulnerability combined with absolute, invisible security.
The commentary provides some incredible homiletical gems from various pastors and theologians to summarize this. Stark notes: "A quiet conscience is a good bedfellow."
I love that.
And another commentator adds, "They slumber sweetly whom faith rocks to sleep."
It connects everything back to the beginning of his prayer. If God is the God of your righteousness, if he is the one who justifies you, then your conscience is clear.
Right.
You are not keeping yourself awake trying to figure out how to defend yourself, manage your reputation, or spin the narrative. You hand the defense over to God, which clears your conscience, which allows you to close your eyes.
Doctrine is not meant to sit in a textbook. It is meant to regulate your nervous system in a crisis.
That is exactly right.
I want to challenge you, listening right now, to identify the literal corn and wine in your own life. What are the material metrics you are relying on for your peace of mind?
That is a tough question.
Is the balance in your retirement account, the approval of your peers, the stability of your company? When those barns are full, it is easy to feel peaceful and secure.
Because you can see it.
Yeah. But if those barns were suddenly empty tomorrow, if the market crashed or the job disappeared, would you still be able to lie down and sleep? Seek the sleep that comes from a quieter conscience, a conscience anchored in the unshakable reality of God's favor, rather than the fluctuating circumstances of the world.
It requires a fundamental shift in where we place our trust, moving it from the visible to the invisible.
As we close, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over, something we haven't touched on yet. The scholar Wordsworth noted a fascinating detail about David's exile.
Okay.
By fleeing Jerusalem, David lost all access to the sanctuary. He lost the physical Ark of the Covenant. He lost access to the high priest's breastplate, which contained the Urim and Thummim, the sacred stones used by the priest to directly discern God's will and receive answers in times of national crisis.
He lost all the physical touch points of his faith.
Yes, all the physical structures, the visible routines, and the tangible methods of his faith were violently stripped away. Yet it was precisely in this barren wilderness, completely void of all religious comforts and mechanisms, that David experienced the unmediated light of God's countenance.
Wow.
Consider that for a moment. What if the complete removal of your usual spiritual routines, the stripping away of your comfortable structures and physical security, is not a punishment?
Right.
What if it is the precise mechanism God is using to force you to experience his direct, unmediated presence, in a way you never could have within the comfortable walls of your normal life.
A striking paradigm shift. It forces us to reconsider the purpose of the wilderness.
Something to keep you thinking.